The purpose of this tutorial is to focus on the Cohort tab within ActivityTracker and discuss briefly the function of cohorts and how they work within ActivityTracker. So ActivityTracker, of course, is accessed from the Tracker menu within PCDART. So simply choose ActivityTracker, and we come up with the main screen, which is a default screen, or the main tab, which is a default screen. And there are 4 tabs, and other videos go through what all these mean. This video will focus on the Cohort tab. So the Cohort tab is fairly small, and not a lot of options here. We basically have 3 cohorts laid out. And a cohort is simply a group of animals that has something in common. On the first cohort here, what they have in common is calving date. So we could choose a group of animals that calved in a particular period and track performance of those animals over time. For example, we might want to say the animals that calved in January on this dairy, how many of them were culled by 30 days in milk or 60 days in milk or 90 days in milk, how many of them got DAs and so forth. The next cohort is an age at calving in month cohort. So this is simply going to look at the age that the animals were when they calved. So in this case, we would probably be answering a question relative to first lactation. Something like, are my animals that freshened at a younger age, are they leaving the herd any quicker than animals that freshened at an older age? You might want to look at animals, for example, that were less than 23 months at age at first calving and compare those that were, say, 23 to 26 compared to those that are 27 months and older to see if we see any difference in cull rates and health disorders post-calving. And the last one, the third, is the birthday cohort for heifers, and it's not available now. It's grayed out because cows are selected, but if we went back here and chose heifers, then that cohort would now be available, and the age of calving one would not. But we would be able to simply look at animals that were born in a certain period. This is very useful to say animals that were born, for example, 2 years ago during a month or 2-month window, to say how many of those animals survived to 6 months of age to 12 months of age, how many of them survived to freshening. Can answer some very good questions about animals, can track rates of respiratory problems, calf foot diseases by certain times of the year. Just a lot of good questions that can be answered by looking at a cohort of animals that were born in a certain period. So I'll go back and reset this to cows from the main tab and go back to our cohorts. Let's do an example of using a calving cohort. Suppose the question was animals that calved in January of 2011 on this dairy. How many of them survived to 30, 60, and 90 days in milk, and what were the metabolic disorders for that group of cows? So first, to activate any of these filters, we've got to uncheck the calving cohort button, to the ignore button. So now that that's unchecked, now it's active and it will apply this filter. So I want to look at animals that freshened January 1, 2011 through January 31, 2011. So now with this filter applied, I will exclusively look at animals that freshened in January of 2011. And important to note that this includes all our failures. So any animals that have culled since that time frame are all included. So now I go back to my main tab, and I've got to choose which activities I want to look at. So let's suppose we want to look at fresh, sold, dyed, all culls. And let's say we want to look at first lactation animals only. And let's grab all the user-defined health events for this dairy. So ultrasound up through calf scours, we'll just grab them all and look at how those animals perform. Now note the date range is still listed January of 2010 through November of 2011. So again, we're going to specifically look at animals that calved in January, but we're going to look at the activities of those animals from November through November. So we've got to make sure that those periods correspond. For example, if I were to put in a date range of February 1st, 2011 through November 15th, 2011, I would show no fresh events because I'm only specifically looking at animals that freshened in January of 2011. So I want to make sure I grab all those fresh events. So I'm going to start this analysis January 1st of 2011, when the cohort began, and follow it through now. And I'm going to choose to show this by days in milk. So if I preview, now I've got a table that specifically looks at animals that calved from January 1st, 2011 through January 31st. These are only first lactation animals, and I'm looking at events in those animals January through November. So on this table, you can see that there are 25 animals that freshened during that window. 3 of them were sold by 30 days in milk, and there were no deads in this group. And so the solds match the all culls. 10 altogether have eventually been culled, but by 30 days in milk there were 3. You can see the incidence of retained placenta that they recorded, some metritis, and etc. They actually had 3 DAs amongst this group. So if I check to show percentages of calvings, it's going to divide everything on this table by 25, and now I can see that the cull rate, 30-day cull rate, was 12%. And we can see that the DA rate was also 12%, very high on both occurrences. So it's important to note that all these animals are a subset of these 25 fresh, and that these 3 sold animals are a subset of the 25 that freshened. These 3 sold animals were not all sold in January. In fact, you can see here that 2 of them were sold in February, but they are from that cohort group of 25 that we established by our calving cohort of January 1st to January 31st. So this cohort tab simply allows us to grab a cohort group of animals and track their performance over time. The age of calving and the birthday cohort work in a similar manner. And again, it's important to think through the question that's being asked first before the cohort is run. But it offers a lot of power to answer some really good questions and to track groups appropriately through lactation and through life.